Hi, this is Stories at Work. Today we're breaking down a dramatized story from the office world about being fired in a single day, a strange cash payout, and how one careful record of dates and paperwork can give someone their control back. This isn't sensationalism for the sake of sensationalism. It's about process. HR paperwork, a dispute over severance, the ethics hotline, and the consequences that get set in motion when someone tries to erase the trail. I didn't tell anyone I got fired that day, not my mom, not my buddies, not even my wife, until I'd practiced the words in my head, enough times that they didn't sound like a failure. I just sat in my car in the parking garage with that envelope on the passenger seat. $800? Not severance, not a payout, not even an apology. It looked like the kind of cash you slide across a counter when you want something to go away quietly. And that was the part that kept scratching at me. Blaine Harker didn't want me gone. He wanted me silent. My name is Calder Voss. I'm the guy who kept the back office from bleeding out. Contract reconciliations, vendor audits, compliance checklists, all the unglamorous stuff that makes sure a company doesn't wake up to a lawsuit. I'd been at Marlowe and Quell Logistics for almost 3 years. We weren't some shiny tech startup. We moved freight, managed warehouses, and handled the kind of paperwork nobody thinks about until it explodes. And in that world, my job was simple. Follow the money and follow the signatures. That morning started like any other. Coffee that tasted burnt. A calendar packed with meetings that could have been emails. I was halfway through a routine vendor review when my Slack lit up. Blaine, need you in conference B now. No context, no hey. Just now. Conference B was the room they used for serious conversations. The one with frosted glass so people could pretend they weren't watching you through it. When I walked in, Blaine was already there, standing, not sitting. That's how I knew it wasn't a normal check-in. He always sat when he wanted something from you. Standing was for power. Next to him was HR, not the friendly HR rep who organized potlucks. This was Maris Olin, the one who spoke in legal language even when she asked how your weekend was. On the table, a folder, a pen, and that thin envelope. Blaine didn't offer me a chair. He just looked at me with this tight little smile and said, Calder, you're a burden. Like I'd been a bad expense line. Then he added, We've carried you long enough. Effective immediately, your role is being eliminated. I blinked, waiting for the rest of the sentence. Restructuring, budget cuts, performance review, something that made sense. Instead, Maris slid the folder toward me and said, This is your termination notice and final pay adjustment. Please sign acknowledging receipt. Final pay adjustment. That phrasing made my stomach drop. I opened the envelope and found the cash. 8 crisp bills, like someone had gone out of their way to make it neat. I looked back up. Why cash? Blaine's smile didn't move. Company card is under audit. Payroll timing, it's a courtesy. Take it and move on. A courtesy? He said it the way you say, bless your heart. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just asked one question, because I couldn't stop myself. What's the real reason? Maris's pen stopped hovering for half a second. Blaine's jaw tightened. He said, You don't fit here anymore. And there it was, the corporate fog. The sentence that means we're not explaining anything because the explanation would incriminate us. I glanced at the termination letter. It claimed position redundancy. But my role wasn't redundant. In fact, I'd been doing the work of 2 people since a guy named Devin quit in the fall. So I asked, Who's taking over my workload? Blaine leaned forward slightly. Not enough to be aggressive, just enough to make it clear he wanted me to feel small. That won't be your concern. Maris cleared her throat. Please sign. I could have refused. I could have fought in that room. But the truth is, in that moment, my brain wasn't in warrior mode. It was in analyst mode. Because something in Blaine's eyes wasn't confidence. It was urgency. Like he needed me off the floor before I opened the wrong file. So I signed. Not because I agreed, because I wanted out with as little noise as possible. Maris handed me a paper with a list of next steps. Return badge, return laptop, do not contact clients, final benefits details. Then Blaine said the line I'll never forget. If you handle this cleanly, it'll be better for everyone. Better for everyone, which really meant better for him. They walked me to my desk like I was a security threat. Maris stood at my shoulder while I packed. Blaine hovered near the aisle, pretending to check his phone while watching me. When I reached for my laptop, Maris said, "Leave it." I paused. "I have personal files. We can arrange for an approved transfer," she said, like I was asking to borrow a weapon. Then she watched my hands as I unplugged my keyboard, and that's when I saw it. On my monitor, still open from earlier, was a spreadsheet I'd been reviewing. Vendor payments, invoice numbers, approval initials. One line item near the bottom had caught my attention that morning. A consulting invoice that didn't match the contract terms. A vendor I'd never heard of. And an approval signature that looked off. Not wrong like a typo. Wrong like someone tried to copy it. Blaine noticed my eyes flicker toward the screen. His voice sharpened. "Let's go, Calder." I nodded like I didn't care. Like it meant nothing. But my chest tightened. Because the moment I stepped away from that desk, I understood something with total clarity. They didn't fire me because I was a burden. They fired me because I was about to become a problem. And the worst part, I could already tell exactly where to look next. But that was just the beginning. By the time I hit the street, my badge was dead. I tested it once, habit more than hope, at the lobby turnstile. The light stayed red. The guard didn't even look surprised, which told me this had been scheduled, not decided in the moment. I walked out with a cardboard box that felt lighter than it should have, because the heavy part wasn't the stuff. The heavy part was what they'd taken from me without a reason I could challenge. In my car, I didn't drive right away. I sat there and replayed the last 30 seconds at my desk, the way Blaine's voice tightened when my eyes landed on that invoice. A vendor I'd never heard of, a signature that looked copied, and a sudden termination with cash, like a payoff. If you're wired like me, your brain doesn't let that go. It starts building a timeline on its own. I pulled out my phone and searched my personal notes. I kept a private habit, nothing illegal, nothing secret, just a running list of work items I needed to remember, because management changed priorities every hour. Vendor names, contract dates, ask finance about this, that kind of thing. The suspicious vendor line was still there in my scratch notes from that morning. Holloway Meridian Consulting, invoice out of cycle, approval initials, BH, Blaine's initials. So the first thing I did was open my email, my personal email. I typed a message to myself with every detail I could remember while it was still fresh. Vendor name, approximate invoice, amount, category, which project folder. It sat under the fact Maris stopped me from touching the laptop, the fact the termination letter claimed redundancy. While they escorted me out, I wasn't collecting gossip. I was collecting a record. Because when people move that fast, they're counting on you to forget the exact shape of the knife. Then I drove home. The apartment was quiet. My wife, Sienna, was still at work. I put the box down and stared at it like it belonged to a stranger. I should tell you something about Sienna. She's not dramatic. She's the calm kind of smart. The kind of person who hears bad news and immediately starts asking, "Okay, what do we do next?" So I waited until she got home, and when I told her, she didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just said, "Did they give you a reason?" "No." "Did they put anything in writing?" "They put something in writing," I said. "But it's vague, and it felt rehearsed." Sienna sat at the kitchen table and looked at the envelope. "Cash is weird." "Yeah." She nodded slowly. "People don't pay in cash when they're proud of what they're doing." That night, I barely slept. My brain kept dragging me back to that monitor, that one line item, that fake-looking signature. In the morning, I did the first responsible thing I could think of. I pulled up my employment documents and read them like a contract, not a memory. I checked my non-disclosure agreement, my non-solicit clauses, everything. I wasn't going to do something stupid, but I wasn't going to be quiet either. Here's the part people misunderstand about office revenge stories. The smart move is almost never storm back in or post a rant. The smart move is to build a clean case, one step at a time, using only what you're allowed to use. So I called an employment attorney for a consultation, not a flashy one, a practical one named Dorian Kest, who sounded like he'd spent his whole career watching companies trip over their own lies. He listened while I explained the termination, the cash, the escorted exit, and the suspicious vendor line. Then he asked one question that made my skin go cold. Do you have any reason to believe they terminated you to stop you from reporting a compliance issue? I hesitated. I don't have proof. You don't need proof to be careful, he said, but you do need to be disciplined. Don't access anything you shouldn't. Don't contact clients. Don't take documents. But write down everything you remember. Names, dates, behaviors. Pattern matters. Pattern matters. That phrase became my anchor. Over the next week, I rebuilt the last 3 months in my head like a ledger. The day Blaine started, tightening budgets, but kept approving new consultants. The way the finance director, Orrin Wyke, suddenly stopped making eye contact with me in meetings. The shift in Maris's tone the last time I asked for a copy of a vendor contract for reconciliation. And one moment I'd ignored at the time because it seemed harmless. Blaine had once joked, Calder's too thorough. One day he'll audit the air. At the time, I laughed with everyone else. Now it sounded like a warning. On the 8th day, something else happened. Something petty. But it told me they weren't done. I got a notification from our building's shared mailbox system. A letter had been delivered under my name. It was from Marlowe and Quell. Inside was a second document. A separation confirmation with a new sentence I hadn't seen before. Employee acknowledges no outstanding wages or claims. It was a trap, mailed after the fact, hoping I'd sign it without thinking. Sienna read it once and slid it back across the table. You're not signing that. I know. But my anger flared anyway, hot and clean. Because it confirmed the thing I'd been trying not to say out loud. They weren't just firing me. They were trying to erase me. That night, I opened a fresh document on my laptop and started a timeline. Not feelings, facts. Every contact, every letter, every odd detail. And as I typed, I realized something that hit harder than the termination itself. I had spent 3 years protecting a company that would happily rewrite me as a liar just to protect one executive's signature. That night, I stopped being the hero. A few days later, I got my first real lead. Accidentally through someone who didn't even know they were giving it to me. A former coworker, Lisa Venn, texted me a simple message. Hey, did you quit? Blaine told everyone you were let go for performance concerns. Also, finance is scrambling. They're pulling old invoices and locking folders. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Performance concerns. So that was the story they'd picked. I didn't answer right away. I called Dorian Kest instead. He went quiet for a moment, then said, That's helpful. It shows they're spreading a narrative. Keep that text. Screenshot it. Save it. Why are they pulling invoices? I asked. If they're nervous, he said, it means there's something in those invoices they don't want reviewed by the wrong person. I hung up and sat there with my hands flat on the table, feeling that mix of rage and focus that only shows up when you realize you're not crazy. They were moving, which meant whatever I'd glimpsed on that screen wasn't a one-off mistake. It was a thread, and if I pulled it carefully, it might unravel the whole sweater. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. The first rule I gave myself was simple. Don't break the law trying to prove you were wronged. No logging into old systems. No just checking a shared drive. No calling clients. No asking someone inside to leak files. If I did that, Blaine wouldn't even need a cover story anymore. He'd have one. So I did the only thing that actually works in an office fight. I went through channels that create paper. Lisa Venn was still inside. She wasn't my best friend, but she was solid, quiet, competent. and the kind of person who never talked unless something was genuinely off. I called her after work hours. "Tell me what you meant by finances scrambling," I said. She exhaled like she'd been holding it in all day. "They've been in panic mode since you left. Oren's team is pulling invoices from last year and labeling everything restricted. They even revoked access for 2 analysts. That's not normal," I said. "No," she agreed. "It's like they're getting ready for someone to ask questions." My stomach tightened. "Who would ask questions?" Lisa hesitated. That's the part I didn't want to text. "There's talk about a compliance review. Not official. But people are whispering." I didn't push her for details. Not because I didn't want them, because I didn't want to put her in a spot where she'd start crossing lines. Instead, I asked, "Did Blaine say anything else when he told everyone I was fired?" Lisa's voice went colder. "He said you were unstable, that you got emotional and couldn't handle pressure." I closed my eyes for a second, because I could picture it perfectly. Blaine laying down the narrative early so nobody would trust me if I spoke up later. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I stared at my timeline document until the words blurred. This is the part where a lot of people spiral. Start rage posting, calling old coworkers, throwing accusations. I didn't. I did something slower. I started rebuilding the vendor trail from the outside. Marlowe and Quell worked with dozens of vendors. A lot of them were public-facing, carriers, warehouse equipment, software providers. Those contracts leave footprints. Press releases, business listings, filings, procurement portals. So I searched the name I'd written down, Holloway Meridian Consulting. At first, nothing. No website, no LinkedIn page, no listings, no corporate profile, which was odd on its own. Most consulting firms at least pretend to exist online. I tried variations. Added LLC, added the city, added our company name. Finally, I found a state business registry entry. Bare bones, newly formed, registered to a mailbox service across town. The registered agent name wasn't a person I recognized, but the date made me sit up straight. The company had been formed 3 weeks before the invoice I'd seen. 3 weeks? That's not how serious consulting relationships work. You don't onboard a brand new firm and start paying them out of cycle unless you're either reckless or hiding something. I called Dorian Kest and told him what I found. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded careful. "Don't accuse anyone," he said, "but keep documenting. If this turns into a wrongful termination claim or retaliation claim, the question becomes, did they remove you because you were positioned to discover or report irregularities?" "Okay," I said, "but I still don't know what they're paying for." "You don't need to know yet," he replied. "You need to show pattern, timing, and motive. Pattern, timing, motive." That night, Sienna sat with me at the kitchen table while I pulled up the registry and showed her the formation date. She leaned in and read it twice. 3 weeks, she murmured. "That's not normal." I nodded. "I think it's a shell." Sienna looked at me for a long moment, then said, "So what do we do?" And that's where the slom happened for me. The break, the shift. Because for the first 2 weeks after being fired, part of me still wanted to believe this was just corporate cruelty, an ego move, a power play. But now I was looking at the outline of something structured, something intentional. And if I walked away, Blaine would win twice. He'd keep whatever he was hiding, and he'd get to ruin my name on top of it. So I made a decision, not a loud decision, a private one. I was going to prove what happened without stepping outside the lines. The next step came from a place I didn't expect, unemployment. When you apply, you have to provide details. You have to explain why you were terminated, and the company can contest it. I submitted my claim with the truth. Position eliminated, no cause given. A week later, I got a notice. Marlowe and Quell contested it. They claimed I was terminated for misconduct. Misconduct. That was the moment my hands started shaking. Not from fear, but from fury. because contesting unemployment isn't automatic. It's a decision. It's paperwork. It's someone in leadership telling HR, yes, lie about him in writing. Sienna watched me read the notice. They're trying to make you unemployable, she said quietly. I swallowed. They're trying to make me look like a problem so nobody listens if I talk. And then Sienna said something that cut through all the noise. Then we make sure you don't have to talk. We make sure you have receipts. Receipts. That word became the whole strategy. I requested my personnel file, legally through the proper method. Dorian helped me draft it. Calm, professional, no accusations. The company had a deadline to respond. When the packet arrived 2 weeks later, I opened it like it was going to bite me. Inside, performance reviews that were mostly positive. A few areas to improve, nothing severe. No write-ups, no warnings, no performance plan. And then tucked in near the back, one page that made my throat go dry. A coaching note dated 2 days before my termination, claiming I'd been verbally counseled about insubordination for asking unapproved questions about finance procedures. 2 days before. A counseling note I'd never seen. Never signed, never been told about. They had created documentation after the fact. I stared at that page and felt something inside me go quiet. Not numb, focused. Because now, for the first time, I wasn't guessing. I had a provable lie. I called Lisa that night and I didn't ask her for documents. I asked her one simple question. Did anyone hear about me being coached for insubordination? She almost laughed, but it was a bitter sound. No, that's insane. You were the least insubordinate person there. Okay, I said. Just needed to know. When I hung up, I added a new line to my timeline. Fabricated counseling note, created to justify termination tied to finance questions. And as I typed it, I realized the real break wasn't losing my job. The break was realizing the company I'd been loyal to was willing to forge my story, like they forged that signature. That's when it hit me. Blaine didn't just want me gone. He wanted me discredited, preemptively. So when the real questions came, I'd already be unstable Calder, the burden, the guy with misconduct. And if a compliance review was coming, then the timing wasn't random. It was defensive. I didn't know it yet, but the next move I made, through a channel they couldn't control, would force them to open every locked folder they were scrambling to hide. 3 days after I found that fabricated coaching note, Dorian Kest called me back with a tone I'd never heard from him before. Less lawyer, more firefighter. Calder, he said, I want you to listen carefully. You're going to do this clean and you're going to do it once. I sat up. What happened? You have 2 tracks, he said. Employment retaliation and the money trail. If there's even a chance these are connected, you don't investigate from your kitchen table. You report through a formal channel that triggers an obligation to preserve records. That word, preserve, landed like a lock clicking shut. He continued, Do you know if your company has a third-party ethics hotline? They do, I said. We had posters in the break room. Good, he replied. You're going to file a report. You're not accusing anyone of a crime. You're reporting facts. The sudden termination, the cash payment, the restriction of invoice access afterward, the contested unemployment with a claim of misconduct, and the appearance of a coaching note you never received. And you're going to say you believe you were terminated after raising questions related to vendor invoices. My pulse started to hammer. And then what? And then, Dorian said, they can't pretend this never existed. They'll have to open a case, and once a case exists, the company's risk people start asking why the story doesn't match the paperwork. I stared at my timeline document, at the clean list of dates and names, pattern, timing, motive. Sienna was across the table, watching my face. What? She asked. I mouthed the words without sound. Hotline. Her eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in focus. That night, I sat in my living room with the hotline number pulled up. I could have done it anonymously, but anonymity is a double-edged thing. If you want action, you attach your name, and you keep your language disciplined. So I called. A calm voice answered, asked for the company name, asked if I was safe, asked if I was willing to provide identifying information. I said yes. Then I read from my notes like I was reading a statement. No adjectives, no drama, no revenge fantasies, just facts. I was terminated without prior discipline. I was paid in cash at termination due to payroll timing. A separation letter cited redundancy. Later, documentation cited misconduct. Unemployment was contested with an allegation I dispute. My personnel file contains a coaching note I never received or signed. 2 days prior to termination, I raised questions about a vendor invoice that appeared out of cycle. After my termination, internal access to invoices was reportedly restricted, and teams began pulling old invoices. The operator asked, "Who did you raise the invoice question to?" "Direct manager Blaine Harker," I said. "And the vendor name?" "Holloway Meridian Consulting." There was a brief pause as she typed. Then she said, "Thank you. Your report will be assigned to an investigator. You'll receive a case number by email. If you have additional documentation, letters, notices, copies of your personnel file, you may upload them to the secure portal." When the call ended, my hands were sweating, not because I'd done something wrong, because I knew what I'd just done. I'd lit a fuse inside a building full of paper, and paper doesn't burn quietly. 2 days later, the case number arrived. The email was bland, corporate, and polite. But the timing of what happened next was not polite. Lisa texted me at 9 in the evening. "Something's happening. Legal is on our floor. Like, actually here. Not a call. They pulled Blaine into a room. People are being told to preserve communications." My throat tightened. That phrase, preserve communications, isn't used unless someone's scared of what will be deleted. I typed back carefully. "Don't say anything else. Just be careful." She responded with 3 words. They looked panicked. And then silence. The kind that means something's gone wrong. The next morning, my phone rang from a blocked number. I didn't answer. A voicemail came through. "Calder, this is Maris Olin from Human Resources. Please call me back today. It's important." My stomach turned. HR never calls you because it's important, unless the importance is theirs. I forwarded the voicemail to Dorian. He replied, "Do not call without me. If they want something, they can put it in writing." Within an hour, another email landed, this one from a general inbox, Employee Relations. It said they were reviewing concerns and wanted to schedule a conversation. The tone was friendly in the way a trap is friendly. Dorian drafted my response. Short, calm, controlled. "I'm willing to participate with counsel present. Please provide proposed times and an outline of topics in advance." They replied within minutes, like they'd been waiting with their finger on the trigger. And that's when the chaos actually started. Because once you force a company into a formal review, they don't just look at you. They look at the thing you might reveal. And if Holloway Meridian Consulting was a shell, someone inside Marlowe and Quell was about to realize their little side channel had a flashlight pointed at it. Lisa texted again that afternoon. "Oren just got pulled into a meeting too. Finance is locked down. They're asking who had access to vendor approvals. IT is exporting mailbox archives. People are whispering audit." It was happening faster than I expected. Faster than I thought a company could move. Sienna watched me pace the apartment like a caged animal. "This is what they want to avoid," she said. "They didn't want you starting a record." I stopped pacing, and now they can't stop it. But the real switch flipped when Dorian received a call from someone I didn't expect. He put it on speaker because he wanted me to hear the tone. A man introduced himself as Rexon Hale, external investigator retained through the ethics program. He spoke like someone who'd done this 100 times. "Mr. Voss," he said, "I'm reviewing your report. I'm not asking you for any proprietary files. I'm asking you for your recollection. I want dates. Who was present? And what was said? I answered carefully, the way Dorian coached me. Then Rexon asked one question that made the room go cold. When you saw the out-of-cycle invoice, did you notice the approving signature looked copied or inconsistent? I felt Sienna's eyes on me. I swallowed. Yes. There was a pause. Then Rexon said, "That's consistent with something else we've seen." I didn't breathe for a second. "Something else?" I repeated. He didn't elaborate. Investigators don't. Not until they've secured the ground under their feet. But he did say this. "I'm going to request a preservation order for relevant records. If anyone contacts you directly, document it. If anyone pressures you, document it. Do not engage without counsel." When the call ended, Dorian looked at me. "This is the part where they either clean house," he said, "or they try to buy your silence." And right on cue, before the day was even over, Maris Olin emailed again, this time with a different tone. Not friendly, careful. She wrote that the company was prepared to offer a separation enhancement if I would sign a release. Sienna read it over my shoulder. "They're trying to pay you." I stared at the screen. Because here's the thing. Companies don't offer more money when they're confident. They offer more money when they're scared of what the process will uncover. And I realized something in that moment. Something that felt like a door opening inside my chest. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. When a company rewrites your exit story, don't try to win with emotion. Win with records, dates, letters, claims they put in writing. The moment you trigger a formal channel that forces preservation, the he said, she said turns into show me the file. The offer came in at 6:43 in the evening. Not a phone call, not a meeting invite. An email with a clean subject line that tried to sound normal. Separation enhancement proposal. Inside, a number big enough to make most people breathe slower. A few months of pay, transition support, and a clause that said I would agree to a full release of claims and a strict non-disparagement agreement. And then the part that gave it away. They wanted it signed within 2 business days. Pressure's always the tell. Sienna read it once, then looked at me. They're scared. I didn't answer right away. I just forwarded it to Dorian Kest. His response came fast. "Do not sign. We counter. And we keep the case active." But the bigger moment, the one that made my hands go cold, happened an hour later. A blocked number called again. This time, a voicemail didn't come from HR. It came from Blaine Harker himself. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, like he was trying to sound human. Calder, "Look, man, this got out of hand. People are overreacting. We can fix this. Call me." Fix this, not "I'm sorry," not "I was wrong." Fix this, as in, make it go away. I deleted nothing. I saved everything. Date, time, file name. And then I sat down, opened my timeline, and added a line that felt like the final piece in a puzzle. Direct contact from decision maker after hotline report. Attempt to bypass counsel. Dorian told me that's exactly what it was. A soft attempt to control the narrative outside formal channels. The next morning, Rexon Hale, the external investigator, sent me a short email confirming a follow-up call. When we spoke, he didn't waste time. "We've confirmed the coaching note was added after the date it claims," he said. My throat tightened. "How?" "Document metadata," he replied, like it was the simplest thing in the world. It was created later and backdated. Sienna, sitting across from me, didn't move, just stared like she was watching a wall crack. Rexon continued. "We've also identified irregular vendor payments connected to Holloway Meridian Consulting. I can't share internal details, but the approval pathway is under review." I held the phone tighter, so it wasn't just me. "No," he said flatly, "it wasn't." And then he said the sentence that turned my anger into something calmer, something like gravity. "We believe your termination was linked to your proximity to those approvals." There it was, not a theory, not a gut feeling, a professional statement, on record. After we hung up, Dorian called me and laid out the next steps like a blueprint. "The company is going to try to close this with money," he said. We're going to let the investigator finish the internal findings. Then we negotiate from strength, correction of the record, neutral reference, compensation, and, if applicable, reporting obligations. Reporting obligations? I asked. Dorian paused. If donor funds or client funds were misclassified, or if invoices were fraudulent, there are regulatory implications. The company may self-report to limit damage. That's not on you to enforce, but it matters to your leverage. That afternoon, Lysa texted me a single line that felt like the headline I'd been waiting for without realizing it. Blaine's office is empty. Security escorted him out. I stared at the message. Then she added, Oren too, finance director. They're saying leave of absence, but nobody believes it. I leaned back in my chair and felt my lungs finally take a full breath. Not joy, not triumph, relief. Because the story they'd tried to tattoo onto my name, burden, unstable, misconduct, was already dissolving inside the building that created it. 2 days later, Maris Olin emailed again. The tone was completely different now. No friendliness, no pressure, just careful legal language. They were updating personnel records, and they would be issuing a revised separation letter. I read it twice, then looked at Dorian. They're backing off. They're protecting themselves, he said. But yes, this is movement. The revised letter arrived the following week. No mention of misconduct, no mention of performance, no position redundancy language. Instead, mutual separation with neutral wording. They also withdrew their contest of my unemployment claim. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't justice in the emotional sense, but it was the thing that actually matters in adult life. They stopped poisoning my future in writing. Then the final piece snapped into place a month later, quietly, the way real consequences often do. A former vendor contact I was still connected to on LinkedIn posted an update about restructuring after an internal controls incident at Marlowe and Quell. No names, no details, corporate vagueness, but I knew what it meant. The invoice trail didn't just scare them, it forced them to clean. Dorian negotiated the settlement the way he promised. Disciplined, not dramatic. Compensation beyond the original offer. A neutral reference agreement. Written confirmation that the coaching note would be removed. A non-disparagement clause that applied to both sides, not just me. On the day it was finalized, I went for a long walk alone, and I kept thinking about that envelope on my passenger seat. $800. A message. Take this and disappear. They had expected shame to make me quiet, but shame only works when you accept the story they wrote for you. I didn't. I built a cleaner story, one backed by dates, documents, and the one thing executives can't argue with once it's logged, process. That was the real revenge, not screaming, not posting, not fantasies. Just turning their own system into a mirror they couldn't look away from. I came home, sat at my kitchen table, and told Sienna, "It's done." She reached across, squeezed my hand, and said, "You didn't just get even. You got your name back." And I did, because the truth is, Blaine wasn't wrong about one thing. I was a burden, just not to the company, to the scheme. And 10 months after they fired me and tossed me $800. Their paperwork finally said what their mouths wouldn't. They were the problem. If someone tries to erase you in writing, don't fight with noise. Fight with records. Calm notes, formal channels, and timelines turn their story into a file that can't be hand-waved away. When you do it right, you don't just win. You close every question and walk out with your future intact. What do you think about this case? Comment, stories at work. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to label you as the problem, just to keep you quiet and stop you from asking questions? What would you do in my place? Take the money and disappear? Or calmly gather the facts, document the dates, and go through the proper channels? If you're into stories where cold strategy and paperwork win, drop a like and subscribe to Revenge at Work. There's more corporate drama ahead with karma that doesn't come loudly but by procedure.